Living sustainably means simply living within one's means. But in more recent times, it also means meeting the needs of present and future generations. Because as far as that's concerned, we've got a bit of a problem. This is where we live. Everything that we've got, everything that we need comes from the place where we live. This is our home. This is the earth. This is where everything is, except for one thing. And that one thing comes from a very noisy neighbour about 93 million miles down the road. And that is the thing that provides us with a free and a constant supply of radiant energy. Now, we as a species, we've had a decent relationship with that neighbour for the past 500,000 years. Give or take one or two ups and downs in the process. But things recently have taken a bit of an unpleasant turn. And we are now the proverbial frog in the saucepan. 250 years ago, we set out on a great adventure. And that adventure was to look for ways to create motive power that wasn't tied to the natural energy resources that were available to us, which is really just wind and water. We needed things to go around a lot quicker. That's what we decided. And appropriately enough, we decided to call this drive for motive power the Industrial Revolution. Ha! Stunningly successful, as we'll all agree, and we've all benefited from it. And there is certainly no argument around that. But James Watt, who was not the most modest and humble of chaps, was a bit hubristic at times, and he said, nature can be conquered if we can but find her weakness. Unfortunately, he was wrong, because he never really had the full picture. Because in order for the motive power industrial revolution to work, we had to dig into the earth and we needed to get out of it lots and lots of resources. The coal and the oil that we have been burning for the last couple of 100 years has been in the ground for millions of years and is a store of carbon dioxide because it used to be forest and it used to be various bits of organic matter. And when it went under the ground, it just contained all of the carbon dioxide. We decided to dig all of that up and burn it. Consequently, all that carbon dioxide that was trapped underground has just bubbled to the surface and has gone straight up into the atmosphere. And that is changing our relationship with the sun because the solar energy, the radiant power, is not reaching us in the same way that it used to. And so that's a bit of a problem. And this is the problem. This is a graph that shows carbon going into the atmosphere since 1750, which is just before Watt invented his steam engine, developed his steam engine, if you like. And you can see which way that curve's going. And there is no sign of that curve stopping. All the good talk that everybody's in, we are not doing it. That's the problem. If we come in and we just focus on what's happening over the last generation, then we know this one because we are seeing climate events all the time. We are seeing the effect of extreme weather. Here we've got the graph on sea level rises. These are at the moment inexorable. We are not doing enough to make them go away, to make them change. The consequences we've got in that is that we're seeing flooding, or we're seeing desertification, or we're seeing that old biblical thing, plague. And whether that's a plague of locusts or whether that's a plague of viruses, it's all coming from the same source. Or it's wildfire. All of those things will come and will attack us in some kind of violence, I'm afraid, because what we're talking about is we've got millions of people on the move. We've got a loss of land for food. We've got loss of habitat. We have got people who are going to say, we have nowhere to live. Where are we going to go? And as we've seen in the last decade or more, it's unlikely to be a pleasant response when we get to that. This is not an event, by the way. This is a process. The effect of climate change has been going on long enough. So it's not as if we're waiting for a cup final and we can buy tickets. We're in it. We are already in the game. And for us at the moment, it looks like this. Temporary climate events which are coming along and are disrupting the way we live and the way we work. The problem that we have in some areas of the world is that that same issue of flooding is near as damn it permanent now. Land is being lost. And water will have its own way because there's either too much of it or there just isn't enough. So in areas of sub-Saharan Africa, for example, where the desert is just moving south, it's taking with it agricultural land and it is bringing with it millions of people, as I say, who have nowhere to live and no way of creating food for themselves. So that's the kind of thing that is really happening. For us, this is what we can look forward to. Our problem is water. We're a small island and we're on the east coast of a very big ocean. And it is reckoned that when the Thames Barrier for London was first opened, it was meant to operate 2 or 3 times a year. It's now operating 6 or 7 times a year. And, quote, subject to appropriate modification, it shouldn't fail permanently until about 2070, which for those of you with little kids, that's in their lifetime and that's easy. And bear in mind that no other UK coastal city has got that kind of protection. So by 2050, if nothing else happens, we can expect to have lost huge parts of East Anglia, the Somerset levels, the coastal marshes, permanently underwater, gone because we haven't taken seriously what it means to start to stop that upward curve of the carbon in the atmosphere. So what's to be done? Let's point a finger, shall we? Let's actually look and say, maybe that's what's causing the problem, what's causing this problem. Because it all came down to there was money to be made. Why did we need things to go around faster? Because there was money to be made. And the shift from a rural economy to an industrial economy brought with it a massive change in the way that we looked at what it was that we were trying to get out of this world. And the thing that we wanted above all was financial capital. And one of the great images of this, I think, is in Birmingham, in Broad Street. And what we have there is a thing called the Golden Boys. This is James Watt talking with Matthew Bolton and William Murdoch. If you're from the Midlands, you'll know all about this. William Murdoch, by the way, he developed gaslighting, so he's one of us in a way. But they're very golden and they're very shiny because they made an awful lot of money for relatively few people, because about 10 miles down the road, this is what was going on. This is the Black Country, my home area, of course. And this is sort of Wolverhampton in the middle of the 19th century. And that is carbon dioxide being pumped into the sky. So where do we go? Oh, here's the thing. We don't have those chimneys anymore, do we? So why are we worried? Well, I'm sorry, those chimneys are still here, but they're somewhere else. We've just exported them. So there is still carbon dioxide being pumped into the air. We're just not seeing it. What we've done is that we've made it nice and clean. It's in motor cars. It's in airplanes. It's in power stations. That carbon is still making its way into the atmosphere. Meanwhile, there are other things that we need to look at. This thing is called the triple bottom line. And this looks at not just financial capital, but it looks at human capital. Well, hey, let's say, and animal and vegetable and mineral capital, as well as the environment. And it's the environment that is, at the moment, I think is holding the trump card for us. This is the way that we need to move. Of course, it's important that we make money because we can't really see an alternative to doing that. But we have got to look at the capital that is engaged in the rest of the way that we live. So what do we need to do if we focus on the environment? Here's a graph from the Centre for Research into Energy Demand Solutions in Oxford. And what they're saying is, if you want to make a difference, these are the top 4 things. You live car-free. Maybe you invest in an electric car. You reduce your long-haul flights. And you use renewable energy. And then we just go down the list even further. Sadly for us, this is not something that the rest of the world can help with, because the truth of the matter is that half of the carbon emissions that are going up into the sky are coming from 10% of the population. And that's us. It's basically North America and it's Europe are creating 50% of the problem. Kevin Anderson, who's a professor at Manchester and at Uppsala, and I think he's got another one over there as well. This is the point that he makes. If the world's richest 10% just reduce their carbon emissions to the European average, we could see the world's emissions go down by 30%. All we need is for rich people to do something about it. David Attenborough, who always deserves a name check on things like this, is quite clear. This is about government. We can do good things, but we have to bring governments with us, because the likelihood of government just waking up one morning going, we've had this fantastic idea about trying to reduce carbon in the atmosphere, without the rest of us going, knocking on the door and saying, any chance we can have a chat about this, is zero. So it comes down to us. We're the ones who today need to be looking at what our changes need to be. So what are the low-hanging fruits? What are the things that we can get into now? I don't mean now, I mean at the end of the webinar, because there's too much good stuff going on in the webinar for you to do that. But what are those low-hanging fruits? Do we have a policy on the way that our staff travel? We've never thought about it. Anybody who says they have, don't believe you. We've always had company cars. We've always jumped in the motor. We've always used the easiest way to get around, and that needs to change. And yes, wouldn't it be great if we could go to all our meetings on a bicycle or a walk down the street? That suggests there's something else that needs to happen. But we have to get rid of this. This is not good enough. And however romantic this is, we've only enjoyed it for a generation. It doesn't hold. We cannot afford to sustain an airline industry. So I'm sorry, it's not just about one long-haul flight in a year. It's about really considering whether we can afford, with a capital A, to have an airline industry at all. So where do we meet people? Well, let me say, I've been talking about this for the last 10 years, and it's time to teleconference. It's time to do what we're doing now. The last 4 months for us has been a fantastic learning opportunity that shows how we do not have to physically get in our motor cars, drive 3 hours up the motorway, have a 1 hour meeting, drive 3 hours back down the motorway. We can be more efficient. We can have a 1 hour meeting using a camera and a microphone. And then guess what? We've got 6 hours of the day left to do stuff. So let's make more of this. Let's make sure really that the teleconference becomes the default position when it comes to communicating with other people. I thought twice about putting this one in, but I don't think we can avoid it. Exhibitions are a huge drain on resources. They're not just on energy and not just on the amount of carbon that gets pushed up in the air as a consequence, but the sheer cost of putting these things on. So Frankfurt, Hong Kong, Light Fair, all the big international shows are really, can we afford to keep on doing that? I don't think so. I am interested to see what's going to happen in the autumn, because we've heard from our friends at Lux Live that there won't be a Lux Live this year, but there will be a digital version. There will be a digital festival in November. And I think that could be the thing that sparks a whole new generation of ways of meeting others, which we had normally done through exhibitions. Where does our electricity come from? If we look inside the company, where do we get our electricity? We can change that, because we do not have to maintain links with people who are using fossil fuels to generate electricity. We can look at renewables much more efficiently now than we used to be able to. So let's get on with that one straight away, shall we? And What about the people who we are working with on a almost daily basis? Are they doing the same things as we're doing? Are these companies using renewables? I've always loved this photograph that Hovis put out a few years back. An electric truck, and it's really green. It's fun. But that's what the questions we should be asking. What are people that we're dealing with? How are they looking at this process? And one for the bosses here. How are we investing our money? How are we investing our funds? What about our pension schemes? What about all the money that's in the bank, and what is that doing for us? It's time to make sure that we're dealing with investments that are not supporting fossil fuel extraction, and instead of that are looking at all kinds of initiatives to invest in renewable energy generation and renewable energy use, because that's where we really, again, what we need to be doing very, very much. So, the business of doing business. The day-to-day stuff of whether you've got staff working at home or whether you've got them in the office, ask them what they're up to. Ask them what they think the company can do to make things better. It's the domestic stuff, because all of that will matter. And I don't think that bosses have got really the majority of common sense in this one, because we all live in the same world. So why don't we listen to people? And then that we might also find that in listening to people, we get a buy-in from people who at the moment are possibly feeling a little bit alienated from process. That one that clicked through very quickly there. If you're not quite sure what to do, try not to do bad stuff. It's called the precautionary principle. If you think there might be something bad on the end of it, best not. Do some more research. The triple bottom line is about a chain of events, a closed chain of events, because we are all in this together. We do not work alone. So we have a virtuous circle of activity, if you will. Each of us constitutes a link. Who we deal with is the next link and the next link. In order to make a chain, all of those links need to be equally robust. The one thing that we cannot afford is the weak link. And there's only two things that you can do if you've got a weak link. One, you ain't got a chain. The whole thing just falls apart. This is not an option. Or you just get rid of the weak links and you replace them with more robust ones. So which of us can afford to consider ourselves as being a weak link? I'd like to ask you. And so we get to the end. Just one more thing before I go. I thought I'd cast the runes on this. So challenge, this idea of challenge, what do we mean by challenge? So what do the runes tell us? Well, challenge has got all in it. And if you shuffle them around, oh dear, all change. All change. And there's a floating E. So maybe the E world, maybe the world of digital communications, is there that could well be the saviour of us. That's all from me. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope that was very, very useful, and I'll see you out there.